The morning sun rose over the mining colony of New Busan on the planet Kepler 442b, and Minho wiped down glasses behind the bar counter of the Last Drop, his small tavern that served the hard-working miners and traders who made this frontier world their home. He was a quiet man with kind eyes and gentle hands who never raised his voice even when drunk customers got rowdy, and everyone in the colony knew him as the friendly bartender who always had a warm smile and good advice for anyone who needed it. His 8-year-old son Dae-hyun sat at a corner table doing his homework before school started, and occasionally looked up to wave at the miners who came in for their morning coffee and breakfast before heading to the deep caves where they dug for rare minerals that kept the colony profitable. The boy had his father's dark hair and bright, curious eyes, and all the regulars loved him because he would help serve drinks and always remembered exactly how each customer liked their order prepared, which made even the grumpiest miners smile when they saw him. What none of the colonists knew was that before Minho came to this peaceful world 5 years ago, he had been the most feared assassin in 3-star systems and corporate. Executives, crime bosses, and corrupt politicians across the galaxy had paid millions to have their enemies eliminated by the man they called the Ghost of Titan Station. He had been so good at killing that his targets never saw him coming, and he could slip through the most advanced security systems like he was invisible, which earned him his ghostly nickname and made him the most expensive hired killer in known space. But all that changed the day Dae-hyun was born, and Minho held his tiny son for the first time and realized that he wanted to give the child something he had never had himself, which was a normal, peaceful childhood, far away from the violence and death that had defined his adult life. So he had taken his savings and bought passage to this remote frontier world where nobody asked questions about your past, and he opened a simple bar where he could raise his son in safety and watch him grow up without fear of enemies seeking revenge. The Last Drop sat at the edge of New Busan where the bright lights of the colony faded into the wild frontier, and Minho had chosen this location carefully because it gave him clear sight lines in all directions and multiple escape routes if his old life ever caught up with him. He kept motion sensors hidden around the property and had weapons stashed throughout the building, including pulse rifles behind the bar and explosives in the basement, because old habits from his killing days were hard to break even though he hoped never to need them again. The bar itself was warm and welcoming with wooden tables that Minho had built himself and pictures on the walls showing scenes from Earth that made homesick colonists feel better when they looked at them while drinking their beer or whiskey. Most mornings started the same way, with the early shift miners stopping by for coffee and breakfast before heading to work, and Minho would cook eggs and bacon on the grill behind the bar, while Dae-hyun helped carry plates to the tables. The boy was popular with everyone because he had inherited his father's calm nature and friendly personality, but he also had a quick wit that made the adults laugh when he made clever jokes about their work or teased them gently about their drinking habits. Dae-hyun believed his father had always been just a bartender, and Minho intended to keep it that way because the child deserved to grow up thinking the world was a safe place where people solved their problems with words instead of weapons. On this particular morning, everything seemed normal as the miners filed in, talking about the new vein of rare earth metals they had found deep in the mountain caves and how it would bring prosperity to the whole colony if the extraction went well. Ji-won, who was Dae-hyun's best friend, and the daughter of the colony administrator, stopped by on her way to school and asked if Dae-hyun could come early to help her with a science project about the local wildlife, which made the boy excited because he loved studying the strange creatures that lived in the forests around New Busan. Minho smiled and nodded his permission while reminding Dae-hyun to be back in time for lunch and to stay close to the settlement because there had been reports of large predators moving closer to the colony recently, which meant it was not safe to wander too far into the wilderness alone. The morning rush was busy with over 30 miners stopping for food and drinks before their shift, and Minho moved efficiently between the kitchen and the bar, making sure everyone got fed quickly, so they would not be late for work, which could result in dangerous accidents in the deep tunnels. He noticed that some of the newer colonists seemed nervous and kept looking up at the sky as if they expected something bad to happen, but Minho assumed they were just worried about the storm clouds gathering on the horizon, which often brought fierce weather to this part of the planet. One of the miners mentioned that the long-range communications array had been acting strangely for the past week, with signals cutting out at odd times and strange interference on the emergency channels. but the technicians could not figure out what was causing the problems. Minho filed this information away in his mind because his old training had taught him to notice when normal patterns changed, and communication problems could be a sign of trouble even on a peaceful world like Kepler 442b, where the biggest dangers were supposed to be wild animals and mining accidents. As the last of the morning customers headed off to work, Minho began preparing for the lunch crowd while Dahyun gathered his school supplies and got ready to meet Jiwon at her house, which was on the other side of the colony near the administrative buildings. The boy gave his father a quick hug goodbye and promised to be careful while walking through town, and Minho watched from the window as his son headed down the main street toward the center of New Busan, where most of the important buildings were located. It was a peaceful scene that Minho had enjoyed every day for the past 5 years, and he felt grateful that he had been able to give his son this kind of normal childhood, even though it meant giving up the excitement and danger that had once defined his existence. He had no way of knowing that this would be the last normal morning of their quiet life together, because high above the planet, 3 alien warships were dropping out of hyperspace with orders to capture as many humans as possible for sale in the slave markets that operated in the dark corners of the galaxy. The Vorthan Syndicate had been expanding their operations into human space and remote colonies like New Busan were perfect targets because they had no military protection and were too far from Earth for quick rescue missions. As Minho cleaned tables and prepared vegetables for the lunch menu, he was completely unaware that his greatest nightmare was about to begin, and that within hours he would have to become the ghost of Titan Station once again to save the person he loved most in the universe. The attack began without warning as 3 massive Vorthan warships appeared in the sky above New Busan, like dark clouds of death, and their sleek, predatory shapes blocked out the morning sun as they positioned themselves over the helpless colony. The ships were built for one purpose, which was capturing living beings and selling them as slaves, and they carried hundreds of reptilian soldiers armed with weapons designed to stun rather than kill. Because dead merchandise had no value in the Galactic slave markets, Minho was slicing vegetables for the lunch special when the first explosion shook the last drop and made bottles fall from the shelves behind the bar, and he looked up through the window to see alien craft hovering over the settlement, with their weapons charging up for the assault. His blood went cold as he recognized the tactical formation, because during his years as an assassin, he had studied every major criminal organization in the galaxy, and he knew that the Vorthan Syndicate was one of the most ruthless groups that specialized in slave raids on defenseless worlds. The reptilian creatures had no empathy for other species and viewed humans as nothing more than valuable animals to be captured and sold to the highest bidder, and their raids were planned with military precision to maximize the number of prisoners while minimizing their own casualties. Bright beams of energy began striking buildings throughout the colony as Vorthan soldiers materialized in the streets, using advanced teleportation technology, and they moved through New Busan with practiced efficiency, stunning anyone they encountered and dragging unconscious bodies toward collection points. The local security forces tried to respond, but they were equipped only for dealing with drunk miners and wild animals, not alien invaders with advanced weapons and military training. So they were overwhelmed within minutes of the attack beginning. Minho grabbed his hidden pistol from under the bar and ran toward the stairs leading to their apartment above the tavern, where he expected to find Dae-hyun hiding in his bedroom. But when he reached the boy's room, it was empty, and he remembered with horror that his son had gone to help Ji-won with her school project. He rushed back downstairs and out into the chaos of the street, where colonists were screaming and running in all directions, while reptilian soldiers hunted them down with weapons that fired blue energy bolts designed to paralyze the nervous system. The air smelled of ozone and burning electronics as the aliens systematically destroyed communication equipment and transportation vehicles to prevent anyone from escaping or calling for help from the outside galaxy. Minho ran toward the administrative district where Ji-won's family lived. But the streets were full of Vorthan soldiers, and he had to duck behind buildings and crawl through alleyways to avoid the patrols that were sweeping the area for hiding colonists. His old training kicked in automatically as he moved like a ghost through the urban battlefield, using shadows and cover to stay invisible, while he searched desperately for any sign of his son among the chaos and destruction. The sounds of the raid were terrifying, with the hum of alien weapons mixing with human screams, and the crash of buildings being torn apart by energy beams, and Minho felt rage building in his chest as he witnessed the casual cruelty of the invaders. He reached the corner of 5th Street just in time to see a group of Vorthon soldiers dragging captured children toward a transport ship that had landed in the town square, and his heart stopped when he recognized Daehyun's small form among the prisoners. The boy was conscious but clearly terrified as reptilian claws gripped his arms and forced him to walk toward the alien vessel, along with a dozen other children including Jiwon, whose face was streaked with tears as she called out for her parents. Minho tried to run toward them, but a Vorthon patrol spotted him and opened fire with their stun weapons, and the blue energy bolt hit him in the chest and sent electricity coursing through his body as his muscles locked up and he collapsed to the ground, fought against the paralysis with every ounce of willpower he possessed. But his body would not obey his commands, and he could only lie helpless in the dirt as he watched the transport ship carrying his son lift off from the town square and head toward the waiting warships. Through his fading consciousness, he heard Daehyun calling out for him in a voice filled with fear and desperation, and the sound cut through his heart like a knife as the transport disappeared into the cargo bay of one of the massive alien vessels. The stun effect lasted for over an hour, during which time Minho drifted in and out of awareness while the raid continued around him, and when he finally regained control of his body, the Vorthon ships were gone, and an eerie silence had settled over what remained of New Busan. He stumbled to his feet and looked around at the devastation that had once been his peaceful home, and saw that nearly half the colony's population had been taken, including most of the children, and many of the younger adults who would bring good prices in the slave markets. The survivors emerged slowly from their hiding places, looking shell-shocked and broken as they searched through the wreckage for missing family members and tried to comprehend the nightmare that had destroyed their quiet lives in less than 2 hours. Minho walked through the streets in a daze, seeing the burned buildings and abandoned belongings scattered everywhere and feeling like his world had ended when those transport ships disappeared into hyperspace, carrying away the only person who had ever truly mattered to him. Mrs. Park, who owned the bakery, found him standing in the town square, staring up at the empty sky, and she put her hand on his shoulder, while tears ran down her weathered face as she told him how sorry she was about Daehyun being taken with the other children. The colonial authorities would arrive in 2 days, she said, but everyone knew that rescue missions were almost impossible, because the Vorthon Syndicate moved their prisoners quickly through a network of hidden bases scattered across the galaxy. Most victims were never seen again, and the lucky ones died quickly, while the unlucky ones spent years being bought and sold, like animals, until their spirits were completely broken, and they forgot they had ever been free. That night, Minho sat alone in his destroyed bar, surrounded by broken glass and overturned tables, while images of his son's terrified face played over and over in his mind, and he realized that his peaceful life as a simple bartender was over forever. The ghost of Titan Station had to come out of retirement because somewhere in the darkness of space, his little boy was trapped aboard an alien slave ship, and no power in the galaxy would stop him from bringing Daehyun home, even if it meant returning to the life of violence he had tried so hard to leave behind. He looked at his hands that had once been instruments of death, but had spent the last 5 years serving drinks and making breakfast, and he knew that very soon they would be holding weapons again, as he hunted down the creatures who had dared to take his child. Captain Una Park of the Terran Defense Force arrived on Kepler 442b, 2 days after the raid, with a small fleet of patrol ships and a team of investigators who immediately began documenting the damage and interviewing survivors to compile their official report. She was a professional military officer who had seen the aftermath of slave raids on dozens of frontier worlds, and her expression remained carefully neutral as she walked through the ruins of New Busan, taking notes on her electronic tablet while colonists begged her to launch a rescue mission. Minho found her in the administrative building that had been converted into a temporary command center, and she looked up from her paperwork when he entered the room, still wearing the same clothes he had worn during the attack because he had not bothered to change or sleep since watching his son disappear. Captain Park had dealt with desperate parents before, and she knew exactly what Minho wanted to hear, but she also knew that giving false hope was crueler than telling the truth. So she set down her tablet and looked him directly in the eyes as she explained the reality of the situation. The Vorthan Syndicate operated the largest slave trafficking network in 3 sectors, and they moved their prisoners through a complex system of hidden bases and mobile command ships that made tracking them nearly impossible for legitimate law enforcement agencies, even when the Defense Force managed to locate a Vorthon facility. The aliens would evacuate long before rescue ships could arrive, and the captives would be scattered to dozens of different locations, making coordinated rescue operations almost worthless. She had investigated 47 slave raids in her career, and had personally supervised 6 rescue attempts, but they had only managed to save 11 people total, while hundreds of others vanished forever into the dark corners of the galaxy where slavery was still legal. The captain promised to file a complete report and add the case to their active investigation database, but Minho could see in her tired eyes that she considered the captured colonists, including his son, to be already dead, or worse than dead. That night after the Defense Force ships departed for their next assignment, Minho sat alone in the last drop, staring at the empty chair where Daehyun used to do his homework, and he made a decision that would send shockwaves through the criminal underworld of 3 star systems. Him walked to the hidden safe behind the bar and entered the combination he had not used in 5 years, and the metal door swung open to reveal items he had hoped never to touch again, but knew he might someday need for emergencies. Inside was his old combat suit made from advanced synthetic materials that could stop most energy weapons and kinetic projectiles, along with a helmet that provided enhanced vision and tactical information during firefights. There were also several custom-made weapons, including a pulse rifle that could punch through starship armor, and a set of throwing knives that were perfectly balanced for silent killing and had never missed their intended targets. Most importantly, there was a data chip containing contact information for every criminal smuggler, information broker and black market dealer he had worked with during his years as the Ghost of Titan station. Along with dozens of fake identities and encrypted bank accounts, he also found a small metal box that contained items with deep personal significance, including the wedding ring of his deceased wife and a lock of hair from Daehyun's first haircut, but he pushed those memories aside because sentiment would not help him. Now Minho spent the next 3 days liquidating everything he owned, including the last drop itself, which he sold to a mining company that wanted to convert it into worker housing, and within a week, he had converted his entire life into untraceable credits. He used encrypted communication channels to contact old associates across the galaxy, and word spread quickly through the criminal underworld that the legendary Ghost of Titan station was coming out of retirement for a personal mission. Information brokers who owed him favors began feeding him intelligence about Vorthan operations, while arms dealers offered him access to military-grade equipment that was not available through legal channels, and even some of his former targets were eager to help when they learned what had happened to his son. The investigation led him through a web of criminal contacts and black market information until he began to understand the structure of the Vorthan Syndicate and how their slave trafficking operation worked. Across multiple star systems, the aliens operated from a massive fortress ship called the Void Market that served as both a mobile command center and an auction house, where captured beings were displayed and sold to the highest bidders from across the galaxy. The ship was over 5 kilometers long and carried thousands of Vorthon warriors along with enough firepower to destroy entire planets, and it traveled constantly between star systems, staying ahead of law enforcement while conducting its evil business. Recent intelligence from a smuggler who had done business with the Vorthans indicated that the Void Market was currently operating in the Proxima system, conducting a major auction that would feature hundreds of recently captured humans, including children from several frontier colonies. Minho knew that infiltrating the fortress ship would be the most dangerous mission of his career, because it was protected by a fleet of escort vessels and filled with enemies who would kill him instantly if they discovered his true identity. But he also knew that Daehyun was somewhere aboard that ship, probably locked in a cage and waiting to be sold like an animal to whoever was willing to pay the highest price. And that thought filled him with a cold rage that burned brighter than any star. He had killed entire crime families for showing him disrespect, and had eliminated corporate executives for trying to cheat him out of his fees. So what would he do to the creatures who had stolen his child and planned to sell him into a life of slavery? The transformation from peaceful bartender back into legendary assassin was complete, as Minho put on his combat suit for the first time in 5 years and felt the familiar weight of weapons designed for killing settling into their holsters around his body. He looked at himself in the mirror and saw that the ghost of Titan Station had returned with a vengeance, and somewhere in the darkness of space, the Vorthan Syndicate had no idea that their most profitable auction was about to become the site of their greatest nightmare. The quiet life was over and the hunt was about to begin, but this time, it was not about money or contracts or professional reputation, because this time it was about a father's love for his son, and there was no force in the universe more dangerous than that. Minho traveled to the smuggler's port on Titan Station, where he met with Captain Soyon, who commanded a fast cargo ship called the Rising Phoenix, and had helped him disappear from his old life 5 years earlier, when he decided to become a peaceful bartender. She was a tough woman with scars on her face from years of running contraband through dangerous space, and she initially refused his request for passage to the Proxima system because she knew it was a suicide mission that would get them both killed. But when Minho opened his case full of untraceable credits and offered her enough money to buy 3 new ships, she realized he was serious about this mission, and that meant the job was worth the enormous risk to her and her crew, the Kai. Rising Phoenix was perfect for the mission, because it was small enough to avoid detection by military patrols, but fast enough to outrun most pursuing ships, and it had hidden weapon systems that could fight their way out of trouble if necessary. During the 8-day journey to Proxima, Minho used every hour to prepare for what he knew would be the most dangerous infiltration of his career, and he studied captured Vorthan ship schematics until he had memorized every corridor and access point, learned the alien language from intercepted communications, and practiced speaking with the proper reptilian accent, until he could pass for a native speaker in casual conversation, which would be essential for his cover identity. The plan was audacious, even by his standards, because instead of trying to fight his way aboard the massive fortress ship, he would pose as a wealthy slave trader, looking to make major purchases at the auction. Using his criminal contacts, he acquired a small cargo vessel, registered under the false identity of a notorious arms dealer from the Outer Rim territories, who was known for selling weapons to rebel groups and criminal organizations. The ship's hold was filled with genuine luxury goods and advanced technology that would appeal to alien buyers, but the cargo area was also modified with hidden weapon compartments and emergency escape routes that only Minho knew about. Most importantly, he had tracking devices surgically implanted under his skin that would activate once he was aboard the Void Market and transmit his location to Captain Soyon, who would be waiting in the asteroid field for the extraction signal. When the Rising Phoenix dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Proxima system, they found the Vorthan fleet exactly where intelligence reports had predicted, and the sight of it made even the experienced smuggler crew nervous. The Void Market was a monstrous vessel that looked like a floating city of metal and weapons, with docking bays large enough to hold hundreds of smaller ships and gun turrets that could destroy planets scattered across its armored hull. Around the fortress ship, dozens of escort vessels patrolled in defensive formations, while a steady stream of buyers arrived for the auction in ships from every corner of the galaxy, including species that Minho had never seen before. He transferred to his cargo ship and activated the false identity transponder that would identify him as Take the arms dealer, while Captain Soyon took the Rising Phoenix deeper into the asteroid field, where she could monitor communications without being detected. The approach to the Void Market was tense, because Minho knew that any mistake in his cover story would result in immediate death. But his fake credentials were perfect, and the luxury goods in his cargo hold were too valuable for the greedy Vorthans to ignore. He was granted docking permission and escorted through the massive fortress ship by reptilian guards, who spoke in their harsh, clicking language about the quality of the merchandise available at today's auction. The interior of the Void Market was a nightmare that would haunt him for the rest of his life, with thousands of beings from dozens of species, crammed into holding areas like animals waiting to be butchered. Families had been torn apart, with parents and children kept in separate sections, and many of the prisoners had the blank stare of people who had given up hope of ever seeing freedom again. The Vorthans treated their captives with casual cruelty, providing just enough food and medical care to keep them alive and healthy enough to attract buyers, but nothing that could be considered basic decency or compassion. Minho was given a tour of the merchandise by Commander Rak, who was a high-ranking Vorthon officer specializing in human trafficking and who boasted about their recent raids on frontier colonies. The alien described humans as particularly valuable because they were intelligent enough to be trained for complex tasks but not powerful enough to pose a real threat to their owners, which made them perfect slaves for wealthy buyers. Every word the creature spoke made Minho's rage burn hotter, but he maintained his cover as an interested purchaser while memorizing the ship's layout and identifying key targets for the sabotage mission. He was already planning. The tour continued through sections of the ship that specialized in different types of sentient beings, and Minho saw creatures he had never imagined suffering in cages barely large enough for them to stand up in. Some prisoners had been modified with cybernetic implants to make them more valuable, while others showed signs of torture designed to break their spirits and make them more compliant for their future owners. Finally, they reached the premium merchandise section, where the most valuable captives were kept in slightly better conditions because they would bring the highest prices at auction. And Minho's heart almost stopped when he saw familiar faces. There in a cell designed for human children were 6 young colonists from New Busan, including Daehyun, who looked scared but unharmed, and was trying to comfort the younger children with the same kindness Minho had taught him. When their eyes met through the bars of the cage, Minho had to turn away quickly to hide the tears that threatened to give away his true identity, but he burned every detail of his son's condition into his memory. Commander Rak noticed his interest in the human children and began describing their special qualities and the high prices they would command at auction, while Minho fought the urge to kill the alien with his bare hands. He told the Vorthon that he needed time to consider his purchases and was escorted to guest quarters where he was expected to spend the night before the auction began the following morning. But Minho had no intention of waiting for the auction, because once the bidding started, his son might be sold and taken away on another ship to a destination he would never be able to track. That night, as the fortress ship settled into its routine, the ghost of Titan Station began to move through the corridors like the predator he had always been, and the hunt for his son was about to become a nightmare that would destroy the most powerful criminal organization in 3-star systems. The night shift aboard the Void Market began at what passed for midnight on the massive fortress ship, and Minho used his surgical tools to activate the tracking devices under his skin before beginning his transformation from slave trader back into the most dangerous assassin in the galaxy. He retrieved his hidden weapons from their concealed compartments throughout his quarters and put on the lightweight combat suit that would protect him from most energy weapons while still allowing him to move silently through the ship's corridors. The first target was easy because Vorthon guards were lazy during the quiet hours and assumed that no one would be foolish enough to cause trouble aboard their heavily defended fortress surrounded by escort ships and thousands of armed soldiers. Minho found a lone sentry patrolling the guest quarters section and approached from behind, using the sound-dampening technology built into his boots to eliminate even the whisper of footsteps on the metal deck plates. His hand clamped over the reptilian creature's mouth while a vibro knife slid between its ribs and into its heart, killing it instantly without giving it time to raise an alarm or call for backup on its communication device. The body was dragged into a maintenance closet where it would not be discovered for hours, and Minho took the guard's access card and weapon before moving deeper into the ship toward his next objective. He had studied the fortress layout during the journey from Titan Station and knew that disabling the internal communication system would prevent the Vorthons from coordinating their response when they finally realized they were under attack. The communications center was lightly guarded because it was deep inside the ship where no enemy should be able to reach it, but the aliens had never faced someone with Minho's skills and experience. 2 more guards died without making a sound as he worked his way through the technical sections of the Void Market, leaving a trail of bodies that would not be found until the morning shift began their routine inspections. Inside the communication center, he planted explosive devices on the primary transmitter arrays and backup systems while downloading ship schematics and security protocols from the computer terminals. The next stop was the power distribution center, where he sabotaged the main generators that supplied energy to the weapon systems and shields, because when the time came for his escape, he wanted the fortress ship to be as defenseless as possible. By the time he reached the detention levels where the prisoners were kept, Minho had eliminated 17 Vorthan guards and planted explosives in 12 critical locations throughout the ship without triggering a single alarm. The holding areas were a maze of corridors lined with cells containing beings from across the galaxy, and the air was thick with the smell of fear and despair as thousands of captives waited for their fates to be decided at auction. Minho moved like a ghost through the shadows, avoiding the patrol routes he had memorized while searching for the section that contained the human prisoners from the New Busan raid. He found them in the premium merchandise area just as Commander Rak had shown him during the tour, and his heart clenched when he saw Daehyun sitting in the corner of the cell, trying to stay brave while comforting the other children. The boy looked thin and scared, but unharmed, and when he saw his father approaching the cage in the darkness, his face lit up with hope and relief before Minho quickly signaled for him to stay quiet. Using tools from his kit, Minho began working on the electronic lock that secured the cell door while keeping watch for patrols and listening for any sound that might indicate his presence had been detected. The lock was sophisticated but not beyond his skills, and after several tense minutes it clicked open, allowing him to step inside the cage, where his son threw himself into his arms for a reunion that both of them had thought might never happen. But this was not the time for emotional displays because they were still trapped aboard a ship full of enemies, and Minho quickly explained that they had to move fast and follow his instructions exactly if they wanted to survive the next few hours. He freed all 6 children from the New Busan raid along with 47 other human prisoners from the surrounding cells and organized them into small groups that could move quietly through the corridors without attracting attention. The escape route he had planned would take them through maintenance shafts and service tunnels to reach his cargo ship in the docking bay. But first, he had to complete his sabotage mission and destroy the void market from within. Captain Soyeon was monitoring communications from her hiding place in the asteroid field, and when she detected the activation signal from Minho's tracking devices, she began moving the Rising Phoenix into position for the extraction. Meanwhile, aboard the fortress ship, the morning shift was beginning to discover the bodies of their dead colleagues, and Commander Rak realized they had been infiltrated by a professional killer who was somewhere inside their supposedly secure vessel. Alarms began blaring throughout the ship as security teams rushed to their stations, but Minho had anticipated this moment and triggered his planted explosives simultaneously across 12 different decks. The massive fortress shuddered as critical systems failed and fires broke out in key areas, while emergency lighting bathed the corridors in hellish red illumination, and automated systems struggled to contain the spreading damage in the chaos that followed. Minho led his group of rescued prisoners through the dying ship toward the docking bays, while Vorthan soldiers ran in all directions trying to organize a response to the catastrophic damage. The artificial gravity began fluctuating as power systems overloaded, and sections of the ship started to lose atmosphere through hull breaches caused by the internal explosions that were tearing the void market apart. From inside, Minho fought a running battle through the corridors as his true identity became known to the aliens, who realized that the legendary Ghost of Titan station had somehow infiltrated their fortress and was systematically destroying it. His weapons never missed their targets as he moved through the ship like death incarnate, clearing a path for the escaping prisoners while Captain Soyeon brought her ship out of hiding to engage the escort vessels. The children stayed close behind him, amazed and terrified to see the gentle bartender they had known transformed into something from their worst nightmares as he killed everything that stood between them and freedom. Daehyun watched his father with wide eyes, finally understanding that the man who had raised him with such kindness and patience had once been someone very different and very dangerous. The escape to the docking bay became a race against time as the void market continued to break apart around them, and Minho knew they had only minutes before the massive ship would explode and take everyone aboard with it into the darkness of space. The hunt for the infiltrator intensified as more bodies were discovered throughout the dying fortress ship, and Commander Rak realized they were dealing with someone far more dangerous than any enemy they had ever faced before. Emergency protocols were activated and blast doors began sealing off sections of the void market in an attempt to trap the intruder. But Minho had studied the ship blueprints and knew every maintenance shaft and service tunnel that could bypass the security barriers. The explosions he had triggered were causing cascading failures throughout the massive vessel, as fires spread through the ventilation systems and power conduits overloaded, sending sparks and toxic smoke into the corridors in the premium detention area. Minho gathered the human prisoners around him and explained in simple terms that they were going to fight their way to freedom. But they had to trust him completely and do exactly what he said. Without question, Dae-hyun looked up at his father, with new understanding in his young eyes, because he could see that the gentle bartender who had raised him was someone entirely different when the people he loved were threatened by evil. The group of 53 rescued humans began moving through the ship using the route Minho had planned during his reconnaissance mission, while staying ahead of the Vorthon search teams that were hunting them. The corridors were filled with smoke and emergency lighting as the fortress ship continued to tear itself apart from the internal sabotage, and several times they had to change direction when their path was blocked by collapsed bulkheads or raging fires. Minho led from the front, cutting down alien soldiers with lethal efficiency, while the prisoners stayed close behind him and marveled at how he seemed to know exactly where every enemy would appear before they showed themselves. His custom weapons had been designed for close combat situations, and he moved through the battle like a deadly dance, using walls and doorways for cover while never missing a shot or wasting a movement. Captain Soyeon had brought the Rising Phoenix out of hiding and was engaging the escort ships around the dying fortress while trying to get close enough to extract the rescue team from the docking bay before the entire void market exploded. Her ship was fast and well armed, but she was outnumbered 20-1 by the Vorthon escorts, and she had to use every trick she knew to avoid their weapons while drawing their attention away from the fortress ship. Meanwhile, inside the crumbling vessel, Minho and his group of rescued prisoners were fighting their way through corridors that were becoming more dangerous by the minute as structural supports failed, and sections of the hull began to buckle. The artificial gravity was fluctuating wildly, making it difficult to maintain balance while moving through the ship, and several times the children had to be carried when the gravity fields reversed completely and sent them floating toward the ceiling. Dae-hyun stayed close to his father, watching in amazement as the man who had taught him to be kind and gentle became something terrifying and unstoppable when protecting the people he loved from those who would harm them. They reached a major intersection where 3 corridors met and found it blocked by a squad of Vorthon soldiers who had set up defensive positions behind portable barriers and were waiting for them with heavy weapons. Minho signaled for the prisoners to stay back while he assessed the tactical situation and realized that a direct assault would result in casualties among the people he was trying to save, which was unacceptable. Instead, he used grenades to create a smokescreen, while circling around through side passages to attack the aliens from behind, and within minutes, the corridor was clear of enemies and littered with reptilian bodies. The group continued toward the docking bay, but their path was blocked again when a section of the ship suffered a catastrophic structural failure, and the corridor ahead collapsed in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. Minho quickly found an alternate route through the ship's waste processing systems, which was disgusting but safer than the main corridors where Vorthon search teams were still hunting for them. The children complained about the smell, but followed without argument because they could see the determination in their rescuer's eyes and knew that he would get them home safely, no matter what obstacles they faced. Finally, after what felt like hours of crawling through maintenance tunnels and fighting running battles with alien soldiers, they reached the docking bay where Minho's cargo ship was waiting, but the bay was heavily guarded and Commander Rock himself was there with a full company of elite troops who had figured out that the intruder would try to escape using the same ship he had arrived in. The Vorthon commander was furious that a single human had caused so much damage to their operation, and he wanted to capture the Ghost of Titan Station alive so he could torture him before selling him at the next auction. Minho looked at the tactical situation and realized that getting to his ship would require going through over 50 armed enemies who had clear fields of fire across the entire docking bay area. He turned to the group of rescued prisoners and told them to wait in the maintenance shaft while he cleared a path, but Dae-hyun grabbed his father's arm and said he wanted to help fight the aliens who had taken him from his home. The boy had seen what his father was capable of, and he was not afraid anymore, because he understood that sometimes violence was necessary to protect innocent people from those who would hurt them. Minho knelt down and looked into his son's eyes and told him that his job was to take care of the other children and make sure they all got home safely to their families, which was the most important mission of all. Then he kissed Daehyun on the forehead and stepped out into the docking bay to face an entire company of elite Vorthon soldiers, with nothing but his weapons and the fury of a father whose child had been threatened. What happened next would become legend among the criminal organizations of 3-star systems, as the Ghost of Titan Station showed why he had once been the most feared assassin in known space. He moved through the enemy formation like a force of nature, using every pillar and piece of machinery in the docking bay for cover, while his weapons found their targets with mechanical precision. The Vorthons had superior numbers and better armor, but they had never faced anything like the rage of a human parent, and their tactical training had not prepared them for an enemy who fought with such focused intensity. Commander Rock watched his soldiers fall one by one as the human warrior carved through their ranks, and he began to understand why this species was considered so dangerous despite their apparent physical weaknesses. Within minutes, the docking bay was silent except for the sound of alarms and the crackle of fires burning throughout the dying fortress ship, and Minho signaled for the prisoners to come out of hiding. They ran across the bay to his cargo ship while he provided cover, and soon all 53 rescued humans were aboard and strapping themselves into crash seats for what would be a desperate escape. The ship lifted off from the docking bay just as that section of the void market began to collapse, and they flew through a rain of debris and explosions toward the open space where Captain Soyeon was waiting. Behind them, the massive fortress ship was breaking apart as the sabotage reached critical systems and secondary explosions began tearing through the hull, while fires consumed everything that would burn. The escort ships that had been chasing the rising Phoenix were caught in the destruction, as debris from their command vessels smashed into their hulls and several of them exploded. When the void market finally died, Minho piloted his cargo ship through the expanding field of wreckage, while the rescued colonists watched through the viewports as the most feared slave trading operation in the galaxy burned like a new star. The rendezvous with Captain Soyeon went smoothly, and soon both ships were jumping to hyperspace, carrying the survivors back toward human territory and the safety of home. During the 4-day journey, Daehyun asked his father about his past, and Minho finally told his son the truth about who he used to be before they came to live on Kepler 442b. The boy listened to stories about the Ghost of Titan Station and the dangerous life his father had lived before giving it all up to raise a child in peace and safety on a quiet frontier world. When they arrived back at New Busan, the news of the void market's destruction had already spread across the galaxy, and the Vorthon Syndicate had suffered a blow that would take them years to recover from slave raids on human colonies, dropped to almost nothing, as word spread about what happened when someone harmed a human's family, and the other criminal organizations began giving human space a much wider berth. Minho reopened the last drop and returned to his quiet life as a bartender. But now his son knew the truth about the man who had raised him, and the lengths he would go to protect the people he loved. The Ghost of Titan Station had retired once again, but the galaxy would never forget the lesson he had taught about the most dangerous force in the universe, which was a parent's love for their child.